Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Rethink Culture, the podcast that shines a spotlight on leaders of businesses that people love to work for. My name is Andreas Constantinou, and I'm a micromanager turned servant leader who developed a passion for workplace culture. My latest project is the Culture Health Score, which is a service that lets you audit your workplace culture with data. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Traci Fenton. Traci is the founder and CEO of WorldBlu. WorldBlu is a well-known leadership, culture training, and certification company. She founded WorldBlu during her senior year in college, which I'm looking forward to learning more about. And she's also the author of Freedom at Work, which is a framework that helps organizations create a culture of freedom and democracy. And she's a celebrated keynote speaker, author, and coach, recognized by Inc. magazine as a top 50 leadership thinker and a recipient of the prestigious Thinkers 50 Radar Award. And she tells me she loves to spend time with Sunny and Luca, her two giant white dogs. And they're giant in that they're 100 pounds or about 50 kilos each. And she recently was in Athens, and I'm in Athens, so we also share that background. We were just talking about Greece and the fires recently. But with all of that, very welcome to the Rethink Culture podcast, Traci.
Thank you, Andreas, for having me. Honor to be here.
So, lots and lots and lots of things we can talk about, but where do we start? Let's start from the basics. Tell us a little bit about WorldBlu and how you got there from that decision in college, in the senior year in college.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a wonderful small town in Iowa, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and I'm the daughter of two teachers. And when I was about 13, my father decided to leave teaching. He taught the hearing impaired. So I grew up around sign language and things like that. He decided to leave that and to go into insurance and financial planning. And the reason I say this is because at that point, all of a sudden, all of these leadership thinkers started to enter my life. He would be listening to leadership greats, Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, all of these wonderful thinkers in leadership, because in insurance and financial planning, they want to motivate you. They want you to be a great salesperson, and have all these great skills. And so my father and I started to talk about leadership and culture and business while I was still very young. And something was awakened in me. I just knew that I was supposed to go down this road. And what I felt deep in my heart, my purpose was for my life, was to help unlock people's full potential. And I know a lot of people will feel that way. They're like, wait, I want to help other people flourish. I want to help other people be at their best. And so that seed was planted in my heart, and I didn't know where it was going to go, Andreas, or what form it would take until I went to college. And my you and I were talking before this, what was sort of changed the direction of my life. When I went into college, I had gone to a performing arts public school, but it was performing arts high school. And it was very, very, very high caliber. And I was in show choir, which I'm sure you don't have that in Greece. But what it is we would sing and dance and have sparkle fingers and wear sequin dresses and dance with our partners. There's men and women, and it was like Broadway level. And my high school show choir, West Side Delegation, we were the #1 show choir in the country. And so I loved doing all of that. I loved performing and doing all that. I laugh and say that's why I still have big hair, because growing up in the 90s, we all had our big hair. And then when I got to college, I really realized it was time to kind of set that aside, although I've had the privilege of speaking on stages all over the world, and so I still pull on that. But I really wanted to get into thinking more about the world. And my freshman year, my first year of college, there was this thing on campus called a public affairs conference. I was like, what was that? What's that? So I remember sitting in the auditorium at this conference at my college, and they had all these speakers from all over the world. And this is pre-internet days. So I grew up, pre-internet. And so to sit there coming from Iowa and hear all these speakers from all over the world talking about all these global issues, it was mind-blowing for me. And I found the guy who was the director of it afterwards in the campus library. And I went over to him. His name was Abe. And I said, I want to do what you just did someday. And he was like, okay. And so my sophomore year, I joined the public affairs conference team and started to work on the conference and worked on it my junior year. And then senior year, I was asked by our college president to head it up. And that really became the turning point for me because, again, like I said, I always cared about helping people realize their fullest potential. And so senior year, right, summer before my senior year of college, we got together the group of students who were going to run the conference for the year. And of course, it's all my friends because you recruit all your friends. And I said, hey, let's do the conference on something that's very, consciousness raising and outside the box and forward thinking about our world. So everyone was supposed to go off during the summer before their senior year and research different topics that we could do it on. So they did, and they came back, and we all met up in the president's boardroom. We took ourselves very seriously. And I said, all right, what are we going to do the conference on? Drum roll. And they said, let's do it on democracy. And Andreas, my first response was, what the heck are you talking about? Democracy is, I'm sorry to say, I said old white guys in politics in Washington, D.C., and it's super boring, and it means voting. And I don't see anything interesting about it at all. I was 20, and I was very young and naive. And they said to me, no, you need to understand that democracy is a style of leadership. You talk about servant leadership. We talk about communicative leadership. And as you know, being Greek, demos and kraton, the people rule. That's what democracy means. And it suddenly clicked for me, Andreas, that the only way that we can realize our full potential is in an environment that gives us the freedom to realize our fullest potential. You cannot realize your freedom or your full potential in an environment of fear and control.
Absolutely.
And I saw that democracy wasn't just about, it's not about government, it's about leadership. And it's a style of leadership that applies to business. It applies to the way we run our schools, the way we run our communities, our churches. Everything can be run with this style of leadership that brings out the full potential of every person. So that was a turning point moment for me. And I did the conference very successfully on democracy, applied to every area of life. And the day after the conference, so it was spring of my senior year, I flew to Indonesia to finish my last semester of college abroad. And I had never been out of the country at that point in my life. So I just come off the high of this conference, freedom, democracy, realize your full potential. And I go to Indonesia. I was there in the spring of 97. It was the Asian financial crisis, and the president at the time, Suharto, was being overthrown. And all of a sudden, this very innocent, naive Iowa girl at 21 was in a country where people weren't free. And I was seeing what that was like. And that took everything from theory into reality to go, wait a second, this is not how many people get to live. This is not how many people get to think. And that really made an impact on me. And when I flew back to the US, I realized also, as a woman, not many women get to start their own businesses still in the world today.
That's true.
And I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start a business that teaches the principles of freedom-centered democratic leadership. And we're going to spread more freedom in the world through the way we run our businesses. And that's what I've had the privilege of doing for 27 years with hundreds and hundreds of the top companies in the world. So that's what got us there.
What's an example of a project that you feel you've made a lot of impact in? A company, whether you want to name them or not, but what's something you look back to and say, wow, we've made a lot of impact?
Okay, so we have worked with brands from very small to large. We've worked with companies like WD-40 and Zappos and Groupon and DaVita and Hulu and HCL Technologies and Meetup and Glassdoor and Mindvalley. And so we've worked with all those companies, and every single one of them has been so fulfilling and a tremendous journey. Menlo Innovations, we were talking about before. it's hard to pick. It's hard to pick just one. I think, oh my gosh, there's so many. Let me pick one that has, because I love impact. We've impacted millions and millions of employees. Our vision at WorldBlu is to see 1 billion people working in WorldBlu certified Freedom Center companies. Gosh, one of my favorite is DaVita. They're a Fortune 500 healthcare company based in Denver. They were on the edge of bankruptcy. They were under investigation by the SEC. Their morale was in the tank. Their top leaders were jumping ship. They brought in a new CEO named Ken Theory, KT. And KT had a different mindset. And we talk at WorldBlu what freedom at work is. There's 3 things you have to have in place to make this shift: freedom-centered mindset, freedom-centered leadership skills, and a freedom-centered organizational design. I'll go deeper into all those in a moment. But KT had a different mindset, and he wanted to build a democratic community within the company first and focus on the company second. If we get the principles of democracy, of democratic leadership right in this company, it's going to ripple out and transform the company. And we were privileged to be a part of that transformation. We've been working with them, and they're still one of our WorldBlu certified Freedom Center companies now 15, 16 years later. And they've gone from the edge of bankruptcy to a $15 billion multinational company. And I have gone and my team and I have spent countless hours with them. We've gone to their village-wide events and meeting people and seeing how employees feel differently when they work in a WorldBlu certified Freedom Center company, because suddenly they're seen, they're treated with dignity, they're treated with respect, they're treated as a person who has worth, which I think there's a very strong correlation between democratic leadership and knowing each person's worth. And so that's what I care about, that every single person knows that they matter and that they have infinite worth and infinite value. And when you meet those people and you see how working in a freedom-centered, healthy environment, and as you know, Andreas, it makes them better people at home. It makes them better parents, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. We impact people's communities as leaders, not just
yes, it ripples
the
out.
employees themselves.
It affects everything.
Is organizational democracy for everyone? So have you had clients approach you and you said, this is not a person that will understand my work? Or have you had people who signed up, but then you found that it was too much of an uphill struggle?
So we vet every client to make sure it's going to work okay. And people love to ask me this question. I'm so glad you asked it too, because organizational democracy works in every industry, every size company, every geography. And I can say that because we've worked in almost every single industry, even ones you wouldn't think of. And all over the world. Now we've worked in over 100 countries. But here's what determines if it works or not. It comes down to the level of self-worth of the CEO.
Tell me more.
So I love to ask the question. I talk about this in my book, and we talk about it when I speak live and all over. I love to ask people the question, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, how would you rate your level of self-worth and why? And worth is knowing our inherent value. It's knowing that each one of us deeply and uniquely matters. But most people don't have high self-worth. Most people are constantly letting what I call the gremlins in their thinking, yippity yap at them. And this impacts the way we lead. So when we say self-worth is different than self-confidence. Self-confidence is situational. You know, I'm confident talking with you about freedom at work. I'm not confident flying a jetliner plane because I don't know how to fly a plane. So I'm not going to be confident at that. Sometimes people confuse self-worth with self-development. So they go, well, I don't have high self-worth because I'm still learning and growing. No, that's self-development. That's great. We are all still doing that. But it's knowing your worth, not in a narcissistic way. So I believe inherently every single one of us is a 10. But if a leader comes to us and they say, I'm a 5 or a 6, or 7 or less than that. And we will say to them, do you want to work on your self-worth? Because high self-worth leaders want to create environments where everyone can flourish. Low self-worth leaders create environments that control people. So if they're willing to work on their self-worth or their high self-worth, we can build a democratic company and a democratic leadership style. But if they're not there yet and they're not willing to work on themselves, Andreas, we're not going to be able to get there.
Yeah, another way maybe that I would see this from the lens of self-awareness. And my favorite definition for maybe self-worth, if not self-confidence, is to radiate the acceptance of oneself.
Yes, it's beautiful. That's exactly it. Yeah.
And leaders who will feel insecure about themselves will often use authority to reinforce or cover that gap.
That's right.
I think that's what I hear you saying.
That's right. They use authority, or they can go the other way and just be super wishy-washy, be a people pleaser, not have the backbone needed to lead and to make the hard decisions. So I love how you said that. That's absolutely right. Yeah.
You talked about working with clients in 100 countries. What are some of the stark contrasts that you can remember? Cultures in, East versus West or North versus South, for example. Do you have any examples that are top of mind?
People come to us, and so one of the things we do is we have leadership training. So we have Freedom Center leadership training that companies can put their people through. And we've had people go through our Freedom Center leadership all access pass from 100 countries. And at first people are like, oh, well, is this going to apply to me and my culture, whatever? You definitely see there are some cultures that are obviously more hierarchical or more almost cultures that are kind of going back to what we're saying on self-worth, start from the premise that you don't have worth. And so we think about cultures in terms of countries, right? Sometimes we think cultures like, oh, US versus Japan versus wherever. But it's not just country cultures. It's also cultures of religion, like religious traditions that people are a part of. It's cultures of a family, the family you grew up in, and how that behaved. So the different cultures that we're a part of that are telling us different messages and telling us different things can really impact the way we lead, and some of our first leadership experiences are in the family. And so I can think of, we have a wonderful leader right now who's in our Freedom Center leader training. She's actually in our course called Fearless Worth. So we have a whole course on Fearless Worth. And she grew up in an extremely successful family. Her parents were in the financial industry, did very, very well. And, but her father was very low self-worth, command and control. So she grew up under that, in that leadership within her family, very, putting people down, undercutting. And now she's going through our training and completely changing her paradigm, because she's like, I always knew I had value and worth, but she couldn't get out from under the thumb. And now she is going to go build her own financial services company and create it democratically using the principles we taught her to create a new model, within that industry. But we worked with so many people. Every single person has a story of what they've gone through. Maybe they've been a part of a religion, that has taken away their sense of self-worth. And maybe that's controversial to say, but I think there are a lot out there that can really diminish a person so they don't feel they're worthy of working in the kinds of environments that you and I stand for. So it's a very interesting question you ask. Yeah.
I can tell you that I've worked for many years in the tech business, and in my early 30s, I was reading a lot of mainstream media praising, the usual suspects, Steve Jobs
Yeah.
and the like.
Yeah.
And that was my role model of a leader. And that's the leader who doesn't make mistakes and is controversial and pushes people away with his or her authority,
Right.
or authoritarian style.
Yeah.
And I was teaching in a class, I was teaching entrepreneurship in a class. And I thought, the students were pointing out that I had some of my facts wrong. And I thought at that point, I cannot admit to not having my facts right. So I'll just insist they're right, even if I know they're wrong. And
Uh-huh.
and that was, an aha moment. Of course, I felt the following days I felt so stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I realized how misled that impression was, that the leader is infallible and is superhuman in a sense because they're the leader. I mean, we're human in every way. And by virtue of being a member of entrepreneur organization EO, we talked about it in the pre-show. I've seen so many leaders, more successful and less successful, but what I've seen in everyone is we're all human.
Yeah.
And we're all as fragile and sensitive, and we have our bad moments, or we have our shitty moments, and we have our brilliant moments, but we don't talk about the dark side of our lives. So, someone outside cannot relate to who you are as a leader.
Yeah.
They just see the shiny side of you. So long story short, I think if we accept ourselves and accept that every leader out there is a human and we are a human, we are also allowed to be fragile and rusty from time to time. And that's okay. And that's how we become better leaders.
That was a great aha moment you had. And I remember about 15 years ago, I was speaking at a very large conference in Orlando, and someone got up on stage. I won't say who, but it was a big name political leader. And he said, I make it a point to try to say at least once a day, I was wrong. And I really embraced that philosophy. If you talk with anyone on my team, you're going to hear me say all the time, oh, I was wrong about that.
Mm-hmm.
I was wrong about that. Oh, because like you said, we're always learning and we don't have to always be right. It's okay. And I think when you have high self-worth, you don't beat yourself up for not knowing. Something we teach is you're not your mistakes. I learned from Gary Ridge, the CEO of WD-40, another world certified company that we've worked with since 2008. He talks about learning moments. Maybe you know about this.
Yes.
So if you reframe it in your mind as, oh, learning moment. Nope, I didn't know that. Whoops, I got that wrong. And move on versus, oh my gosh, I'm going to beat myself up.
Yeah.
It's just a whole different way of approaching life.
Yeah. The same person came to mind. Gary was on the podcast a few episodes ago. And my key takeaway is this: we don't make mistakes, we have learning moments.
Yeah.
And mistakes are a prerequisite for those learning moments. You can't have learning moments by simply borrowing someone else's mistakes.
Right. You can't. And I don't know if Gary shared this with you, but I've spent so much time there at WD-40 and with Gary. He's a dear friend. When he became CEO, he wanted to shift the culture at WD-40. They became a WorldBlu certified Freedom Center company. And I said, okay, where does it start? He goes, we had a punitive culture. And that's part of how he came up with the learning moments. They had such a punitive culture. And I think a lot of business cultures are like that, whether it's collectively punitive or individually punitive. So the learning moment shift is huge. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because this is the paradigm that comes from a traditional family governance system, if you like.
Yeah. It's
authority based. It's authoritarian leadership because parents have responsibility, they have experience, they have power, but we don't know any other democratic system or peer-based system
Right.
for leading,
Well,
for managing conflict, for collaborating, and so on.
right. I like to say command and control leadership says, you serve me. You serve me as CEO, commander. Command and control says, you, employee, serve me. Servant leadership says, I serve you, which I love. I love the concept of servant leadership. But I believe there's another step that can embrace servant leadership, which is democratic leadership, says we serve each other. We serve each other.
Oh, I see.
And yeah, and that's why what's so unique about democratic leadership is you actually have to change the systems and processes in order to do that. Otherwise, you're still in a paradigm of, you can still be a servant leader in a hierarchical company. You could be, I'm a CEO, I'm here to serve you, but guess what? It's still going to be unnecessarily hierarchical. I'll just be a benevolent, dictator, so to speak. And I've had many CEOs come to me and say, oh, I'm a benevolent, Traci, I'm a benevolent leader. And I was like, yeah, that's they're not there yet.
No. No. And a similar concept is accountability-based leadership, which I see as two people within the team, whether they are, hierarchically in different layers or whether they're peers, come to an agreement on what each is expecting of each other. Whether it's the goals that a manager asks their employee to set, or whether it's like one team working with another team, it's an accountability contract.
Yeah.
And this is very common, if not the rule, in bossless or self-managed organizations. Morningstar comes to mind, where they have this accountability contract.
Yep.
But it should be the norm, because I guess we're saying the same thing. You're coming at it from democratic leadership angle, and I'm coming at it from an accountability leadership. But I think we're talking about the same thing, which is being accountable to each other, being peers to each other. How would you describe it?
Yeah, well, you don't have freedom without accountability. So in my book, I talk about what is organizational democracy. And I did both my undergraduate and graduate work that I think no one's done in the world to actually define what democracy is. People think, oh, is democracy a vote? Is that democracy? No. Voting is a way of making a decision. You can have voting, you can have consensus, you can have consent-based. Voting is a way of making a decision. So I go all over the world and I say to people, what's democracy? Oh, is it transparency? Okay, so I have transparency. Do I have democracy? What about in North Korea? You can vote, but you only get one choice. You don't get a choice, you get one option. So what are the principles that create democracy? It's this thing that you're there in Athens. I was just there in Greece. I've studied Athenian democracy, right? I've studied all these early examples of democracy many people don't know about. Many people don't know about the Iroquois and how we got our sense of democracy from the Iroquois. Or they don't know about democracy in Turkey, in parts of Turkey, or what about, in Iceland. And so I've been all over. I've studied all of this. And what I found is there's 10 principles that create a democratic system. And organizational democracy is not it's not values, they're principles, because principles are inviolate and unchanging. So one of those principles is accountability. One of them. You have to have all 10 to actually have democracy work. And I think that's what's very unique about WorldBlu. Yes, there's the bossless self-management conversation. I think you have to self-manage, and we've worked with many companies that are self-managed, but you have to have the systems and processes that allow people to self-manage put into place. And what kind of systems and processes are those? They need to be democratic, in my opinion.
So besides accountability, what are the other principles, or some of the other principles?
Transparency, decentralization of power, the balance of the individual and the collective, dialogue and listening, reflection and evaluation, fairness and dignity. So I break them down in my book. I go through each of the 10 principles, and I've pulled from the hundreds and hundreds of companies we've worked with. I give 10 practices for each principle of how you can put it into practice in your company at a beginner, intermediate, and advanced level. So people are running all over going, I want to be bossless or self-managed or no hierarchy, which, by the way, I don't believe in completely flat organizations. There's just no way that's possible. But how do you get there? And in our research, we found that 75% of culture is determined by your systems and processes. So we have a whole program called Grow with Freedom, where we work with entrepreneurs and we take our Freedom at Work scorecard, which is the only scorecard tool in the world that I'm aware of that actually measures the level of freedom and democracy in a company at a leadership, individual, and systems and processes level. So it's those things that then drive behavior. So when we get really clear of how well the principles of democracy are being practiced, think about a continuum of a hierarchical command and control company on one end and a democratic company on another. Where does your company fall, right? And when we look at those 10 principles and we say, all right, you're doing great on fairness and dignity, not so well on accountability and transparency, how can we then put the right systems and processes in those areas that can turn the company around? And I bet you did something similar, Andreas, when you were turning around your company, right? You changed the way you do things. And that's what gets it done. But I find most systems don't go far enough, or they cherry pick one or two things and they're not as comprehensive as what we do.
What is the hardest aspect of those 10 values or principles to get right?
Yeah.
Where do most companies fail in?
Okay. So I do make a distinction, a very important distinction between principles and values, because values are how we behave, but principles are how you build the house, right? So if I'm building a house, the principles of building are going to be the same whether I'm building a 1-story house or a 100-story building. So principles are inviolate. And then within a democratic company, you have the values that guide the behavior of the citizens of that company.
So sorry, when you talked about transparency and accountability, what is the moniker you use? What is the word you use for them?
Principles. They're principles. Organizational democracy.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So for us, it's a very important distinction because like I have core values that guide my life, but those values could change. Or we have values at WorldBlu that guide us, but the principles are how we build the company. It's the organizational design. It's the systems and processes, right? And so most people will talk about just one thing, like just about accountability. Yeah, but okay, cool. But what else is needed is the whole system. What is hardest for companies, it's not a principle, it's systems and processes. And I think that's what's so unique about what we do at WorldBlu, what I talk about in my book that I haven't seen anywhere else, is we actually present the whole system and give you systems and processes for how to do it and that are democratic. And there's tons of books out there that are like, oh, I'm just going to go study a whole bunch of companies and I'm going to cherry pick 1 or 2 or 3 cool things that this company happens to do. But in my book, every single company is a WorldBlu certified Freedom Center company, which means that their employees have taken our scorecard and let us know, yeah, this actually is a democratic system. So we know that all of these practices come from a proven system.
Was there a moment where you had to confront your own fears? And I'm asking because you often ask, what would you do if you're not afraid? So how much of your principles are you able to apply in your own life? And how did you deal with a personal fear?
Yeah, I mean, all of them, all of them. So when I started WorldBlu when I was 21. We've been building WorldBlu. I have a whole team. We work around the world for 27 years. So as you know, being an entrepreneur, I like to say, if you're not confronting fear on a daily basis, you're not driving hard enough. You're not reaching high enough.
Yeah.
I have to overcome fear all the time in my personal life. I'm about to make my 17th move in 25 years. I've moved to so many cities knowing no one and started from scratch because I love to learn. I love to meet people. I've done crazy stuff like skydiving when I don't even like a roller coaster. I asked myself, what would I do if I weren't afraid? I jumped out of an airplane. I travel around the world, often by myself as a woman. And so don't underestimate how courageous and fearless you have to be. I build a company, so every day you're overcoming so much fear and helping all the CEOs and leaders you work with to work through their personal fears. So what would I do if I weren't afraid? I ask myself that question every single day, every day. And it keeps me going forward.
And how do you overcome the fear? Is that what you say to yourself to overcome the fear?
Yeah, I go through, in the book, I talk about the 5 questions that I ask. And the power question, what would you do if you weren't afraid, came from when I was in my early 20s. And I called a mentor of mine. And I had just started WorldBlu. I was a full-time graduate student in Washington, D.C. at American University. I was also working part-time for the NASDAQ stock market, running their $30 million corporate foundation. I was traveling nonstop. I was about 25. And I called a mentor of mine and I said, I'm so stressed out. I don't know what to do. Here are all my problems, kind of barfed them up to her. And she said to me, I have one question for you. And I said, what is it? And she says, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And I did not realize, Andreas, that I was afraid. I didn't think I was afraid. I thought I was stressed. But stress is fear. Anxiety is fear. All these words, mental health, so much of it's fear, handling the fear within. And so that question changed my life because I realized, what would I do if I weren't afraid? And I instantly knew what I needed to do. And so often we don't make a decision. We don't move forward because we're afraid. And the hardest thing is even to admit we're afraid. So in the book and what I teach and in our Fearless Mindset course and all this stuff, we have 5 questions that I call the power question practice. It's what are you afraid of? So I do this to myself. Just the other day, I took out my journal. I was working through, I'm about to make a move. What am I afraid of? Why am I afraid? What am I afraid of? Why am I afraid? I wrote 2 pages. What would I do if I weren't afraid? I wrote even more. How would you feel without the fear? How would I feel without the fear? Energized, except people are always like, why are you so happy? Because I know how to handle fear, And then the last question is, why is it okay to let the fear go? And I'm a deeply spiritual person. I talk to God all the time. For me, God is love. And I listen to God. And I try to live my life being obedient to how I feel I'm being led by divine love. And so why is it okay to let the fear go? For me, it's because I can trust God. And that's been proven in my life over and over and over again. And that's why even when you're walking through storms and hard times, you can still feel joy. You can feel confidence. You can feel open to the learning that you're going through because we're all learning all the time. So yeah, I use it all the time at WorldBlu. We take the principles, we put them into operation. We do everything democratically and we walk our talk. And to me, it's not a big deal. It's just who we are and what we do. So yeah.
What's something that makes culture at WorldBlu special? So what is like a habit or ritual or anything else that you're proud of?
That's a great question. You know what makes our culture, so we do things democratically, all of that, but here's what makes the WorldBlu team so awesome is because everyone has high self-worth. And when you have a team of high self-worth people, you are not dealing with dumb drama. You are all aligned and getting it done every day. Like I said, our vision, our purpose at WorldBlu is to transform the way leaders lead with freedom at work. Our vision is to see 1 billion people living, leading, and working in freedom. And we're at 1.25 million now. So I have a long way to go. But it took me a long time to figure out how to hire high self-worth people who also had the skill set. And we actually asked, I went through, oh my gosh, it's so painful to make a bad hire or to hire someone who you really like, and they have the perfect CV and, resume, and then they get in there. I've had, I've had to deal with men who I hire who think, hey, little lady, I'm going to come in and take over your company. I've had to deal with all that kind of stuff. But we ask the question now in our hiring process, which is on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, how would you rate your level of self-worth and why? We ask that question. And I talk about that in the book. I talk about how you have to hire for high self-worth. And now that my whole team is high self-worth, 8 or higher is kind of the high self-worth zone. It's a game changer. And I think that's what makes our culture so special. And that's why when people come to our global summits and events, and they meet WorldBlu and they meet all of us, people always say, I found my tribe, I found my people. And I think it's because they feel love. I hope it's because they feel love. Because when you love who you are, you naturally love others. Mm-hmm. And that's something else on my team. Everybody gets texts from me, which usually every text I send probably involves like multiple emojis that include hearts. That's just how I am, you know? That's my style. Not everybody has to be that way, but that's just how it is. It doesn't mean, I mean, we work hard. It doesn't mean it's all kumbaya, but you can have, I mean, I talk about that one of the attributes of a freedom-centered leader is love. And another attribute of a freedom-centered leader is being in their power. And you're not in your power if you're in fear. So love, when we're loving, it takes us out of fear. Yeah.
One of my favorite sayings is love, not fear. I have this friend who's created this movement, Love, Not Fear. And it's some workshops and some and a philosophy, but it's that there's either love or there's fear. So every emotion from jealousy to resentment to looking down on someone to insecurity, it all starts from fear.
Yeah, all of it.
So it's really binary.
It totally is. And that's why you hear so much talk right now about mental health. And I'm not trying to say that I'm a doctor or, you know, or anything like that, but I think a lot of it has to do with people not understanding how to handle fear. And the thing is, like for me, in my experience, if I say I don't have to be afraid because of love, well, what? Well, because God is love, but also I think another aspect of it that's very important that takes people out of fear is understanding. When you understand something, you're not as afraid. You know, when you understand, okay, why do I not need to be afraid? Because this thing that I thought isn't what it is. You know, when you understand, then you're not as afraid. Part of fear comes from when we don't understand something or how to move forward. Yeah.
Traci, as we come close to wrapping up the podcast, is there something that you would go back to your 21-year-old self in your senior year and you would whisper to the young Traci?
Yeah, I would say it is going to be really freaking hard, but you're going to be super successful. So stay at it. Your intuition is right. Your intuition is right. And I'm really proud of what we've been able to do all over the world. And it's so true. Like you just don't quit. And I think for us at WorldBlu, we have a very big vision. We want to bring freedom to the world in a world that is not free. And that's what I will be doing for the rest of my life. And that's why we're WorldBlu. Blue is universally recognized as the color of freedom. And we want to see a world where everyone can live, lead, and work in freedom rather than fear.
And is there any book or anything you read or watched recently or any parting thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Well, there's so many. I mean, I'm always reading wonderful books and podcasts. And I really think it comes back to, I would say to your audience, anyone who's listening, it all comes back to just loving who you are. If you can truly love yourself and figure out how to get there and do that, and we have programs that do that, but that's not the point of this. It's just more saying, find the way to embrace the 10 that you inherently are. It's going to change every single relationship in your life and help you handle fear. And you'll take that into your team or your company, and they're going to go, wait, something's different about you, because each and every one of us matters. That's the whole premise of democracy. You matter. That's why you should have a voice. And that's why it's what I believe in so firmly.
So Traci, thank you for inspiring us. And hopefully that has planted a few seeds for some of the people listening to think about leading at work in a different way, in a more democratic way. And I'm glad we got to meet. I know we didn't get the chance to meet in Athens, but we at least got the chance to meet here. Thank you to everyone listening to the podcast, and thank you for being generous with your time. You can support us by telling your friends about the show or leaving a comment so that more people can actually learn about the show. And if you've been listening but not watching, you've been missing out. And you can actually go to YouTube. The channel is Rethink Culture, and you can just watch, not just listen. You can also email me personally. Andreas@rethinkculture.co is the address. And like I love to say, keep on leading, creating a happier, and I would add a more democratic place for you and those around you.